Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Essence Podcast Into the Woods, in which I go into the woods to meet with folkloric or traditional practitioner of witchcraft or adjacent traditions. And today I am with the amazing and lovely Irene Glasse, not Eileen Glass. What am I saying? Irene Glasse. Hello, Irene.
Hello. It happens a lot. Don't worry about it.
I don't know where Eileen came from then. Well, it was weird, anyways. But I'm going to keep it because it's a good start to the to our discussion today. So for those of you who don't know who Irene is, so Irene Glasse is a heathen witch based in Western Maryland. She's a longtime teacher of witchcraft, meditation, and magic in the Mid-Atlantic. She's the co-author of Black Feather Mystery School, the Magpie Training, out through Dragon Alchemy in 2022, and a contributing writer of the recently released Gemini Witch, Unlock the Magic of Your Sun's Sign. And also this year, or next year's, I should say, 2024, Llewellyn Sabbat's Almanac. We're a blogger, a columnist, and have also performed and taught workshops and led rituals at many festivals and conferences over the years. She is a main organizer of the Frederick Covenant of Unitarian Universalist Pagans, that's Frederick Cups, and which offers events, rituals, classes, and workshops to a large, vibrant community. She's also an active in the community building, and is one of the main organizers of Sacred Space. You can find out more about her at www.glassewithanewitchcottage.com. And as always, I will place that down into the show notes. So welcome, not Eileen, Irene. Welcome, Irene.
Thank you so much for having me, Ben. It's lovely to be with you today.
I was really looking forward to having you on, and I'm really looking forward to speaking with you today. Mainly because, and I'll be honest with you, I wasn't really aware of your work up until a few months ago when a mutual contact introduced us, and then since then I've been following you on Facebook, and it's been like, how have I not known you all these years?
I think some of that is I'm very geographically based. And the witch world is so wide and so amazing. And, especially in sort of the continental, Americas, there's so much happening. And I have been a fixture of the Delmarva scene for about 20 years. And I've very much focused on my backyard, I guess we could say. So
Mm.
if you are involved in Maryland, Virginia, DC, sort of the associated areas, you've probably encountered me before. I teach and I organize and I perform. I've been in various pagan bands over the years. I have been around for a very long time, but just in my little part of the world. So I think it's very easy to get sort of overlooked is the wrong word, but like I'm here in the trenches in my own little garden.
Right. Well, and I'm glad that you brought trenches up because that's part of your story. We can talk about that later on. But I'm curious. So for those who probably have met you probably at Sacred Space or Between the Worlds, which happened this past year and other years, they probably have seen you in the crowd. They probably saw you running around or interacted with you. So for those of you who may have met you but don't know who you are, what's your background? What is your spiritual practice? Who are you? Who are you?
Sure thing. So I am like so many witches of a certain age. I came up in witchcraft in the mid to late 90s, which means I, of course, started out as Wiccan because that was pretty much the only option at that point in time, at least if you were learning from books and local groups of various sorts. Like so many of us, I, got my hands on my first book about witchcraft and immediately was like, I am going to drink directly from this fire hose. I love everything about this, and this is what I'm doing from now on. And everything kind of unfolded from there. So I am a natural organizer. I come from a family line of natural organizers. My mother is a contra dance community organizer. She runs dances and dance weekends. And so some of the way I approach magic is building communities around it. So my background is very much witchcraft. I became heathen it's about 10 years ago now. Sometimes the gods show up and just sort of grab you and shake. But my heathenry, of course, is very much reflective of my background in witchcraft. And then the big thing that is a huge focus of my work, of course, is that I am professional clergy. So I represent paganism in many different spaces. I manage rites of passage. I do pastoral counseling. I look after community. And it is the sacred thing for me that I love to do is take care of the pagans.
A few moments later.
Okay, so we actually just experienced a weird technical thing, and Irene just gave a beautiful answer to a question, but I didn't actually record any of it. So I'm going to ask it again. So Irene, I know recently you built a Hulda folk house on your property, and one of the questions that one of the ways I had asked you this before was, how do you bring your heathenry into the landscape that you're in? So many of the practitioners in traditional and folkloric witchcraft that I know, anyways, are really interested in connecting with local landscape, regardless of where they are, regardless of what their ancestral traditions were. It's about connecting with the folklore and the spirits and where they are. So please repeat everything you just said.
I will do my best. So heathenry gives us this gorgeous lens for how we relate to the land around us. And I am a revivalist as opposed to a reconstructionist, right? Which means we take ideas from the past and we bring them forward and expand upon them, especially because heathenry, like most of the old world religions, is in fragments, right? We have scattering bits of lore, but one thing we know is that the connection to the land where you live, to your landvatir, to your husvatir, is so very important in heathenry. And it's very important for my spouse and I. Both of us are, I guess we could call us like, hands in the earth people. My spouse grew up on a cattle farm, maybe 45 minutes from here out in West Virginia. I have been a gardener basically my entire adult life. I can my own vegetables. I have a very elaborate vegetable garden and an orchard and all sorts of other ridiculous nonsense. I live on 3 acres in the country. I also live in a very old, by the standards of the United States, house. The oldest part of the house was built in 1768. Most of the rest of it was put on in 1880. So it is an older place with a long, beautiful history. So the spirits here are very present. And I think for those of us who are wired to connect in this way, it is possible to go quite deep, especially here where there's such a long pattern of the human world and the Vetir around this particular building working together. One interesting thing on our property is the spring that once supplied the water for our entire region is in my yard. So we have this. Oh, it's absolutely wild, right? So we have this incredible history for this space. This house was the toll house for the mill just down the street. So it's part of an amazing piece of history that continues to inform, but it also means that there's been this long pattern of work and shared work between the Landvatir and the humans who lived and worked here. You don't have a mill without a river that turns it, and you don't have water without a spring that supplies it. So for my spouse and I, when we first came to this house, it was about the land first. We fell in love with the land first. The very first act of magic here was something that is called a land taking within heathenry, where we walk the perimeter with offerings and a burning torch and basically go, this is a place we intend to live. Those of you who would like to stay and remain and work with us in co-creative harmony, we would love for you to stay. And it continues, right? So there is a big shrine here inside the house for the house spirits. This is definitely a haunted house, but in a very benign, helpful way. So far, they've been absolutely lovely. And then, of course, we have a Hulda folk house outside, which is an Icelandic spirit house. My spouse and I went to Iceland for our honeymoon, and we saw them everywhere. And ever since then, we're like, we need one of those. Those are perfect. So we have a Hulda folk house, which we make little offerings to our land spirits in. But along with that, I'm out in the garden every morning, especially right
Yeah.
now. At the moment, it is early September in Maryland. We're not done with growing season yet, right? We're like, you can harvest brassicas and lettuce and all sorts of. I mean, I'm still picking green beans. Like, there is a lot you can do here until like October, and sometimes even later if you're lucky. So every morning when I walk out, it's good morning, land spirits. You're so beautiful. I'm so grateful to be in this space with you, and it's that moment of connection. And I am more consistently connected to my landvatir than I am consistently connected to my gods. For me, it's basically sort of land and house spirits, then ancestors, then deities. And that's not uncommon for heathens. Some of us are ancestors, then deities. A handful of us are deities first, but I would say that our history definitely indicates that we are very oriented toward place. And it makes sense. Heathen religion comes from a part of the world where it's very hard to survive winter. You need to be in good with your local land spirits, like real good.
Well, and that's the thing. That's something that I think a lot of other cultural paradigms, they don't necessarily they don't necessarily neglect, but that piece around really having to be in connection with the landscape, because the landscape could kill you or could allow you to thrive, right? And I've heard that many times. Even that the blurring between what is ancestral, what is land spirit, what is deity, exists within heathenry, as far as I understand it.
Well, absolutely. We use the word Vatir, or a word that is W-I-G-H-T. It's pronounced white, but spelled differently. And one interesting thing in a lot of the lore is that a deity is a Vatir, and an ancestor is a Vatir, and a land spirit is a Vatir. They're all spirits. Like, we would just be using the word spirit as opposed to necessarily delineating them into more firm categories. And it's one of the things I really love about heathenry, because of course a large enough land Vatir becomes a deity. You know, when is a mountain still a land spirit, and when is the mountain a god? When does that shift happen? When is a very powerful ancestor no longer just a human ancestor? When have they made that next step? And I think that whole thing is a lot mistier than many of us give it credit for. There's like that Western need to put everything into categories. We sometimes do a disservice to the spirits around us, especially given how powerful they can be. You know, like, I live in a part of the world where we get hurricanes. You best bet that one comes through, your local land spirits are who you want to talk to.
Yes.
You know, yes. The gods will do what they can, but you want to be in good with your local land spirits.
No, absolutely, and it's one of those things. Like, it's one of those things. I think that it really shows that connection to the landscape then, when somebody's directed that way, because it's really the distinction between a book-based religion versus that whole, like, the story as being the place as opposed to the natural place. Absolutely. Yes. So with that, then you went to Iceland for your honeymoon. I have to ask this. So, of course, Iceland is kind of the, at least for all the heathens I know, it is the Holy Land. Like, it is the place.
Yes, Mecca.
But I mean, they have such an incredible relationship on a cultural level, in a story level, to their landscape. Did you go and do the saga tours then, and go and walk around the landscape and that?
Yes, we did. We did the ring road. So we did we did 9 days and hit many of the high points, and it was amazing. You know, we dipped our Thor's hammers in the water at Godafoss, where the last heathen idols were pitched into the waterfall during the conversion to Christianity. We went to the Althing because, of course, we did. You have to. We're contractually obligated. We're even, along with being a UNESCO World Heritage Site, of course. And it was wonderful. It was wonderful. I think if at all possible, heathens should go. It is amazing to see the landscape that inspired the stories, especially because I come from a very old land. I live in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. We are some of the oldest mountains in the world, and they are soft and rolling. Land here has been occupied by humans for a very long time, by First Nations people well before the colonizers arrived. It is old land, and going to Iceland and seeing these immense, legendary landscapes with very young land, geologically speaking, very young land, it's revelatory. You begin to understand small things too. Icelandic weather means that there are rainbows everywhere all the time, and they're huge, and they're different than the ones here. And then you're like, oh, Bifrost. Okay, of course, because there's always rainbows. So the gods are always coming and going, whereas here, rainbows are kind of a special thing. We don't get them that often, right? We get thunderstorm season and that's it. But in Iceland, there's a rainbow every day. And in some places, if the sun's shining, there are rainbows always. You know, so many waterfalls.
That's beautiful. I had as a guest on a couple of sessions ago, and I'm not sure where his episode is going to be in relation to yours, but I had Albert Bjorn Scheel on, who is Sussex Peller.
Yes.
Really cool guy. And of course, he put out the Icelandic Plant Magic book, right?
Yes.
Through Crosscrow. And he was speaking because he originally comes from the UK. He comes from Sussex, and he's only been living in Iceland for the past 7 years. And for him, it's like it's just a lived experience for him. You know, he talks often about, well, he talked a little bit about in the interview, what it's like for North American heathens to come over there. Some people get it, some people don't. But some people who don't get it, it's like a weird thing that it's like, oh, you're showing up to to blot with sleep pants on? Like, what is this, right? Where is your robe and all of that, right? What was it like for you to connect with the modern Icelandic culture when you were there?
I loved it. There's a funny thing where modern Icelanders have some interesting philosophical and cultural similarities to Americans, in that they have a little bit of that rugged individualism going on, because of course they must. They're by the standards of, and again, I only have my own lens, right? So as an American, I've had the great privilege of being able to travel abroad quite a bit, and the Icelanders are quite friendly. The American culture is, just in case any of you don't know this, we're like the ridiculous, like, hey, y'all, how you doing, cousin, to the rest of the world. So the Icelanders, by the standards of Americans traveling abroad, United Statesians traveling abroad, they are very friendly and outgoing. Their sense of humor is fantastic. I really, really loved those contacts. And I prefer lived heathenry. I prefer lived magic. I don't need you to show up in ridiculous robes. The community that I lead is not, we jokingly call it Grand High Episcopagan. Some of our rituals are, yeah, I mean, and like the power of aesthetics cannot be overstated, right? So some rituals need this level of aesthetic cueing. So, if you come to a Samhain ritual at Frederick Cups, there's huge multi-tiered altars draped in black. Everyone is dressed appropriately. But most of our gatherings, we live this. It's not, you're not just going to church on Sunday, right? You're pagan every day of the week. So I would be perfectly happy if somebody came to a bloat wearing pajama pants. I'm glad they're there. And I don't know, I really enjoyed meeting all of the Icelanders that I was lucky enough to come in contact with. I develop hyperfixations from time to time because I'm a little neurospicy in some ways. And the one that I'm doing right now is basically planning a heathen tour of Iceland that I hope to lead at some point in time, because I think that would be all of the information together for being able to go for like a week or a week and a half and really hit everything that has a lot of heathen history. That doesn't exist in one form yet that I have found. So of course, if you want it to exist, you have to build it yourself.
Do
so
it.
that is
when
that's
are
one
you
of my
thinking of
current
doing
hyperfixations. I think my fantasy is that it would work by summer of 2024. I think the reality is that it's probably summer of 2025. And I would definitely take everybody over during the warm season, because you should see that first before you do Iceland in winter.
It's like it is on my list. I really want to do
I
it.
hope
Like
you go, Ben. It's magnificent.
To go. I want to do the whole like North Sea cruise thing, like hit Shetland, then Faroe, and then go over to
Oh
Iceland. I would
yes,
love
that's
to
a
do
great.
that.
I've had a bunch of friends do that. It's wonderful. I think the only thing that's tricky with those is you never get enough time. Like usually when you do one of those, you basically do sort of the golden circle in Iceland, which is just that little area around Reykjavik, and there are beautiful things there. But some of the best part of Iceland for me was being out in the East Fjords or the West Fjords, where there's no one for miles, and it's just this extraordinary connection with the land and the wind and the elements there. There's a word we use in heathenry, which is hail or heilu. It means healthy, sort of. It also means sort of energetically whole. Iceland is heilu, because it's younger, it's not as settled, and quite frankly, their people treat their land much better. And they Christianized poorly, late, and not, it didn't go like super like there's lots of little bits and pieces that lingered. There was a fairly Christian period up to and including witch burnings, but like the conversion was very, very late. So there's this presence in land that is extraordinary, and some of the best experiences for me were being just out in that space. Yeah, we went to an abandoned Viking hill fort called Borgarbjörki that was, no one else was out there. It's amazing. It's impossible to put words around these things, which is part of why I want to lead a group there, because I'm like, I found a shiny thing I really want to share. This is where the Gemini thing comes in. I need to share the shiny thing I found with as many people as possible.
Oh, I feel you. I must have Gemini in me, because I'm the same way when I discover something.
No, like we find something cool and like, oh my gosh, everyone else needs this.
Show it. So
Here,
then,
take the thing.
what was it like for you then to come back to your property? I know different relationships.
Oh, so good.
What's it like?
Oh, it was wonderful. So this is what will always bring me home. I mentioned before, the spirits where I live are very lush, and we have a very established relationship with them. I have, I'm 43. I've lived in a lot of places, and one of the interesting things with this specific house and land, and part of why I know that I belong to it, is that when I walk through the doors after I've been at a festival or on a long trip, I feel the most amazing sense of relief and safety. Like I will put my hand against a wall and just go, oh, thank God, to be home. So by the end of my trip, I wanted to come home. I missed my land. I missed my dogs, I missed my own bed. I am a little bit of a high maintenance sleeper, so I wanted my memory foam mattress again and, all of that stuff. But more than anything, I missed my land. I love it here. I lived in Japan for 3 years when I was young, and part of my heart lives there. And I was in Iceland for only 9 days, but I think other pagans and heathens who have gone will tell you that it gets its little fangs into you very quickly. So I think part of my heart now lives there, but the majority of my heart lives here in Western Maryland. This is where I have built a community over the past decade plus. This is where I live, and this is the land I belong to. One of the funny things about living in Japan was discovering that if I'm out of sight of the Appalachian Mountains, if I can't see them every day, I'm not okay. This is the land I belong to.
A little, just too far over the horizon.
That's right.
Yeah, it's just too far. It's I ask this question often with guests. Part of my own life journey has been that journey home, right? One of
Yes.
my issues in my life was I didn't get a chance to make a decision to come to Canada. I was too young.
Right.
And so part of the reason of moving back to the UK is that sense of home, and that sense of I feel like that sense of belonging is so huge, and people often underestimate it. At least I'm making generalization there. Maybe it's just me
Yes.
who's underestimating it in my life, but and that journey to really emphasize that. We were talking beforehand, before the technical interruptions.
Before we got here.
We were talking about that sense of belonging in the pagan community. And you said something really important, that so many people come to these traditions seeking sense of belonging.
Yes.
And this is one reason why in-person events are so big right now. One of your big projects is being on the board of a sacred space.
That's
and
right.
This past year, so many people came to Sacred Space and Between the Worlds. Can you speak a little bit more about that sense of belonging in the communities that you work with?
Yes, absolutely. I think I'm not speaking out of turn when I say that pagans are weird, just as humans. Most of us were the kids that no one wanted. We are overall very intelligent. We tend to be quite bookish. We tend to be tethered to forces and places that are a little bit different than the mainstream. And it means that even if you were brought up in a family that loved you, and my family loved me, and we're weirdos, I was raised by hippies, right? Even with that, we can feel very alone. And part of why I think I have a compulsion around community building is to create the family that I want and the connections that I want. We have hard science now that having good community ties, strong interpersonal relationships will improve everything, your mental health, your lifespan, your physiological health, all of that. It has such an incredible impact. And many of us have spent large portions of our life without it. So I think part of why the pagan community is growing and in-person connection is growing is this awareness that so many of us are isolated in our way, and finding a place to be connected to others with whom we share something, culture, belief, something, is so important. And along with that, it's good for us. Being in community will be uncomfortable for you. I think that's the other thing, is I don't want to over romanticize it. Being in community means finding your edges and experiencing others, but it's worthy work. And some of the negotiation of those edges is where that beauty really comes in. The friendships that we have where we've been able to negotiate a harder situation and come back to still being connected, those are the strong relationships. They're the ones that last, the ones that are your forever.
I completely agree. I feel like online it's very easy to misunderstand, have falling out, block others because they don't entirely fulfill our points of view of what we want them to be, or our expectations of what community should look like. And it's a lot more difficult to do that in person when you're living in a space with people. I'm curious about your pastoral work. Now, in truth, I think we might just rehash what you were saying before that was caught off.
Yeah, sure.
So if I go back and we didn't have that conversation as part of this recording, you work as a pastoral care professional.
That's right.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you see in that professional capacity working with the community? What are some of the big needs right now, in your opinion?
Resource sharing and management are some of the really big ones. So things are not getting easy for the dwindling middle class. And most pagans, the last large scale study of us as a demographic was many years ago now, but most of us fall in the middle class line and below. We tend not to be wealthy. And things are tough. So a lot of what I connect people to are resources, right? Is finding affordable therapists, it's finding childcare, it's getting food, it's helping somebody fund their medical bills. It's all very practical. I think there's a romanticization of clergy work that neglects the real deep, more fleshy beauty of what it is to be clergy, which is to be something of a caregiver for a large number of people, for a community, right? So we tend to need help when things get hard. So I get the phone call when somebody's broken up with a long-term partner, or some of the harder ones that have come in, I get the phone call when somebody's spouse has suddenly died. And then that becomes the center of my universe for a while. I'm the one that goes and sits with people in court when they need to have moral support by their side. Like, this is what clergy can be in the pagan community, and it's very much needed. We need the trusted, safe human to be along with us. And in many cases, I feel like a lot of us are sort of swinging without a net, because so many of us don't have a designated clergy person in our lives. We don't have a large enough organization. And many times our clergy are not trained, which is another thing that is really tricky. Many traditions of witchcraft are very good at teaching how to create a beautiful ritual and lead a beautiful ritual, how to craft a glorious invocation, which correspondences go with what magical goal. We're a little bit less good about teaching communication skills, listening skills, how to negotiate the legal system where you are, how to present yourself professionally at a hospital when you need to go in and advocate for someone, how to do conflict management, how to set boundaries without, how to be assertive without being aggressive, I think would be the way to say it. All of that is really important material. And it's part of why I've gone through Unitarian Universalist training, because it didn't exist much in witchcraft, at least when I needed it. So I went through the UU also, which is, wonderful. Unitarian Universalists are fantastic. I am also a UU. And they had wonderful options for strengthening my practice and being able to be a better servant to my community.
I know one of the kind of pagan community organizers up here in Ontario, Wendy, who is also UU as well. It seems like there's a lot of professional clergy who are UU who are in paganism. I don't think there's anything else really that,
Not
maybe
much. There's, we have Cherry Hill Seminary, which offers very good training. But in terms of larger organizations that welcome pagans as well, UUism is one of the only games in town, and they're lovely. It's UUism is based around the idea that we can share values without sharing beliefs, and we have principles that I think most pagans are perfectly happy to agree with: the inherent worth and dignity of every person, the interconnected web of life, like all of this stuff that is also inherently pagan for most of us, that is in our core spirituality as well. So it's a really beautiful match. And one lovely thing being a pagan in UU spaces, pagans don't generally have the benefit of a building and land attached to it.
Yes.
So a lot of what I'm able to do with Frederick Cups, I can't run that out of my house. Even here with a few acres, I can't have 200 people on my property, right? But I absolutely can do that at the UU congregation in Frederick, where we've got 7 acres and a beautiful building. And it enables us to connect to more people, to allow more people to come together in shared ritual space. It creates a wider pathway into paganism. Cups groups by their nature tend to not be path specific, but if you're comfortable with that, with just being like, I sometimes think of this as like, we're like a trading post, like everybody comes in, some stay, some go, people find what they need. Like if you're comfortable with that, and I love that. I love being the gateway drug. Like if you want that,
Perfect.
cups
That's awesome.
chapters are the way to grow. Like it's perfect.
Well, and you pick up on a really important point. A lot of my other guests, or even just privately, we've discussed how there seems to be a trend with particularly folkloric people who are interested in folkloric practice and traditional craft practice, moving away from, say, newer forms of witchcraft like Wicca, because there's a want to connect in with tradition again. And part of that is it's almost like in seeing other marginalized groups like African traditional religions, community-based practitioners like spiritistas or whatever it is, right? There seems to be, again, that community element there. There seems to be that community supporting one another. What do you find as somebody who's so involved in community when a newcomer comes to these communities and you're interacting with them? What do you find is the make or break for many of those people, if you can even generalize in that way?
I think it depends on what they're looking for. Sometimes we're immediately wrong, you know. I think some folks are still looking for fantasy witchcraft. Witchcraft is having a moment in pop culture right now. And it's like super hot, and it's great because I can get fabulous clothes fairly inexpensively that I'm definitely going to put in my closet and keep forever. But I think there is a glossy version of witchcraft, and then there's the real thing. And most of us who are the real witches are human, you know? So I think people can come in hoping and expecting ridiculous robes and all of the rest of it, and instead finding a many-faceted community that really runs the gamut of age, that really runs the gamut of race. Our community is queer dominant, so coming in and really finding a vast expression in terms of how gender is portrayed, in terms of what relationships look like. So sometimes people walk in and that's immediately just it's not the witchcraft they were shopping for. And then I think other people really want a coven experience, and many covens have formed out of CUPS chapters, including my own, right? There are several smaller groups that have spun off, but that's not what we offer. And that's okay too. For someone who is like intentionally looking for that smaller group experience, you're not going to get that at one of our rituals. Our smallest rituals draw 50 people. Our largest ones, it's more in the 250 to 300 range. So you're always looking at a larger community experience. And that's a beautiful thing as well, you know, like it depends on what you're looking for. Yeah.
Okay.
I think sometimes there's also an overwhelm, you know, because the community is fairly diverse. We offer a lot of activities. So that's the other thing. It's like, and there's a drum circle on Friday, and the shadow work circle meets on Tuesday, and then we're going to have a heathen ritual on Sunday. Like, and there's just, it's a lot.
Sounds like a good, you know, women's institute church picnic to me, you know.
No, it is. I mean, it's, you know, it is not dissimilar to other religious communities. There's a lot of stuff going on and a lot of wonderful people who are all human, including me.
That's the thing. And it goes back to what you were saying about lived practice, right?
Yes.
You know, one of my soapboxes, and I used to be this person. I suspect you used to be this person too. Everybody I speak to was this person. There was a dichotomy between magic and mundane.
Yes.
And the older I get, maybe I just like have stopped giving a shit so much, but like the magic is the mundane and the mundane is the magic, right?
That's right. Well, and I think it's important to remember that the roots that we draw from are from fully integrated cultures. So this separation of mystical from material, this is a sort of a post-conversion situation. It's really a post-enlightenment situation more than anything else. Was the stripping out of magic and mystery from basically everything. It used to be that it was all just one sort of melange. This was just life. And I think the closer we can get to that lived practice of paganism, the better off we are. And that means that yeah, absolutely. So you do your big ritual, right? And then you also maybe go do a stream cleanup, and then you maybe meet up at a coffee house. And if you're with your community the whole time, all of that is the lived experience of being pagan. You're a pagan in all of those spaces. It's not just you don't just pop your hat on for the full moon and then take it back off again.
And then you
This
go
is
and
something
you live your own
are.
life. Yes.
Right. You know, I think it's one of those funny things where many times in pastoral counseling sessions, when someone presents a problem, like, well, have you taken this to your spirits yet? Or, you know, and people still forget, you know, as they have a moment of like, no, like, you know, like sometimes we're like, have you done any purification protocols around this? Have you done anything to clear some of what you're experiencing? No. Like, okay, let's remember that your conflict with Linda in accounting is still happening to you, a magical practitioner, and all of those tools that you use magically can be used for Linda in accounting.
So true. I was having a random conversation at 2 a.m. the other night with one of our colleagues. I won't say who, but it was one of our author colleagues. And we were talking about how deep down, those people who they do magic, but they don't believe in it. And so they don't
Yes.
actually think that the magic is going to work. Therefore, when they see somebody else successful with magic, they get jealous. And that underneath subconscious feeling of, I'm really jealous of your success because I can't make this work for me. That whole idea of, well, do you actually believe what you're doing? Right?
Yes, that's sadly real. And it's always so hard to bump up against. I think we still have this thing, this piece of programming that magic belongs to special people. And I think some of that comes from having a culture where the priest class is very different than the laity, right? Whereas in paganism, everyone has access to the magic, but deprogramming that piece is hard. So a lot of times I feel like people will assume that somebody else is successful or is getting their magic to work because they're special, and they're not. Usually what they've done is practiced a lot. That's the case with every very good witch I know. It's just there's a lot of nose to the grindstone. You get better at it by doing it. One thing I always tell my students is like, yes, I'm very skilled at ritual. I've been doing this for over 20 years. That's why I didn't come with pre-installed software for knowing how to do ritual voice or write invocations. This is learned and practiced, and I performed a shit ton of terrible fucking rituals. Like, get better over time.
It's true. It's nobody comes into this world being the witch of blah blah blah,
No,
knowing it all. It is trial and error, and of course, the trial
it
and
is.
error isn't the stuff that you'll see on Instagram or YouTube or
No,
Facebook.
it's that's the glossy witchcraft, It's so perfect and aesthetic, and quite frankly, like most of us are just not that we're not that put together, my God.
Now, those colleagues who are listening to this who have Instagram accounts, don't come for me. Don't email me. Email
No,
Irene
it's
because
beautiful. It's absolutely lovely. Well, and I mean, I have my own fucking Instagram presence as well, right? Like, so we do, those of us who are sort of, let's call it professional witches, we do put out our professional quality work that should look that way. But we're talking about the difference between who you are at a board meeting with your company president versus who you are at home in your living room.
Totally.
And both of those are just as for our colleagues, for ourselves, that Instagram presence is us, but it's us at the board meeting, right? As opposed to us in our living room with our feet on the coffee table, telling the ghost to shut up because I want to get some sleep tonight. Like, it's same witchcraft, different containers.
Different containers, exactly. Well, so that's a good transition point for a gotcha. I have a gotcha question for you here.
Okay.
So, well, I'm totally on board with this idea of smaller groups, working groups. I feel that need myself, right? In connecting with all these really amazing practitioners back home, knowing that, in a year's time, I'll be over there and being able to go and work with them, actually working with them. But of course, we're also authors. So we've both just come out with books where we're facilitating that sort of work from a distance, them on their own. I'm curious for you with your book, because it was put together from your teaching material, from
Yes.
the material that you work with your in-person groups with. I'm wondering, what was it like for you to put that together in a book form, knowing that you may never even meet some of the people who read this?
Alternately terrifying and wonderful.
Yeah.
Really. There is a certain amount of, I feel very grounded in my sense of self. And I know what people will largely experience when they come to a class with me, because I've been teaching for a very long time.
Yes.
And when you take that personal piece out, you wonder, what are they going to get out of this? If they can't actually hear my voice and see my face, if I can't teach them how to raise a cone of power in person, and I can only explain the mechanics of it and tell them how to do it with a group if they want to give it a try, is it going to work? And that is a strange thing indeed. I will say the one thing that's kind of good question mark that was happening at the same time as I wrote the book was the pandemic, where a lot of us were shifting over to Zoom and different approaches to doing rituals anyway. So there is a certain amount of like, okay, I guess I can teach this distance because I fucking had to and didn't have a choice about it. So there's that piece. But, for me, I did redo a lot of our material in order to be usable in a distance format because I can't just demonstrate. You have to be able to explain it. So it is challenging, and it's also beautiful. I've got, Magpie Training runs an online course as well that goes along with the book, right? And I've got one course wrapping up right now, another one starting in November. I've got a wonderful person who Zooms in from Italy once a month for class, stays up until like 2 o'clock in the morning their time in order to study with this group. It's extraordinary. And I think it is like, it was scary and sometimes difficult. And also I'm so glad that there is another way for somebody to find their connection to the sacred. I think I'm like a lot of teachers where like, if I can help make that light bulb go on for somebody, then all the trouble was worth it. And it's been really beautiful to be able to get material out. Along with that, because I've been in the community for a long time and I've presented in many places, I have people who really wanted to study with me, but were unable to because of the limits of geography, although I've taught up and down the coast. And it was really great to be finally like, okay, I've got a thing for you here.
Right.
You can have this book. This is the entire first year stuff. Like, and you can email, like, send me a message if you've got questions. I will talk it through. Like, that part was beautiful to be able to answer that call in the community as well.
What did you learn about yourself by having going through that change?
That is such an excellent question.
What you're here for, that's the real gotcha.
Yeah, no, it's exactly. I think I became more confident because being able to see my work stand on its own actually helped a lot. It made me feel better about my own material. Talking to people about it made me feel better about my own material, really getting interesting questions. And one of the best things that happens with authors, and for those of you who are playing along at home, if you have a book you love, if you read Ben's book and it blew your mind, please send Ben an email and tell them that. Like, that is so, that validation, we're all kind of shut-ins, we sit here, we write classes and books and we sit by ourselves a lot. So that validation that the work speaks for itself, for me, was really important. It was a beautiful moment of like, no, this is good. I've created something worthy that's helping. Kane and I make no joke about, or make no secret rather, about the fact that what we want to do is unleash a wave of super empowered badass witches upon the world. We think it needs it. So having people that I haven't taught in person have that same experience and come out more empowered, oh, it's been the best fucking thing ever. I'm so glad I did it. It was terrifying, and I'm so glad I did it.
I actually can imagine how terrifying it is. Absolutely.
Yes,
I felt the same way. Yeah. It's true. I felt the same way. It's terrifying because, again, it's that what I learned through this process was really how much I need that validation from others. And then that question of, okay, you work through that. At least I worked through that piece for me. And then I came out the other side really feeling, okay, so if anything, if I got anything from this process, it was, I can now understand much deeper where other people who have needs of validation come from. If that makes any sense.
Yes, yes, it absolutely does. We really do care about the Amazon reviews you leave.
It's true. It's so true.
Well, I think that's one of the things that's interesting. There are so many more writers now, which is wonderful. And I think it was John Beckett was talking about this, that we've moved from a world of paganism where we had like BNPs, big name pagans, from that to practitioner leaders, which is what most of us in the trenches actually are, right? We are people who are actively working in community, we're teaching, we're leading groups, and we also write books. And it's a different way of being in relationship to the pagan community. We're probably sitting next to you at the conference you're attending. You just don't recognize us because we don't have our book covers mounted on our hats, which we should probably consider implementing as a process.
I think it should be handed out. Yes, we should be handed out. Well, it's funny you mention that because, and I don't know why I keep bringing him up, but I think I just really, just really resonate with his experience. We have a mutual acquaintance, mutual friend who came to your conference, and I was asking, like, what is it like for you to, connect with all these people, like some bigger names down there? And half of them, he had no idea who they were, and it was
Right.
like, wow, that's nice. That's really nice. I really like that. You were
Yeah.
hobnobbing with all these pagan authors who, 20 years ago would have been like,
It's exactly who are you, plebeian?
of that generation. I mean, I say that because some of them are still going around to festivals. A friend of mine in the UK had this situation where a bigger name pagan author from 30 years ago was just atrociously rude to him for no apparent reason, and it's like, okay, I'm glad that we're all normal people, they can go and do their own thing, but
it is really dangerous when you start believing your own press releases. Like,
this is the
we need to
thing,
be very
right?
careful about how much credit we put in our promotional material. It's designed to sell books, not be accurate, kids.
This is the thing, right? I mean, and considering how many of those books are now, we need to be very careful when we work with them now, right? But
Absolutely.
it is interesting, and I feel like it's part of a much broader trend again of coming back to community, founding communities that are strong. Now we've got with the Order of Bards, Ovids, and Druids, for example, that I'm a member of. Now we have members who they joined in the 90s, and they've established those groves, those festival communities and whatnot. They're starting to age out now. They're starting to get into their 60s and 70s, and they've built such solid foundations.
No, and the passing of the torch is absolutely vital. I think this is one of those things that we forget, is that if we want the traditions and the practices that we have to continue, community is part of how that happens. One of the things that I've seen over my many years in the community is how many communities are a bit hostile to families and don't think about the fact that if we don't raise our children in this environment, if we don't find a way to include them and to create a welcoming space for families, there won't necessarily be another generation. And what, I now know some wonderful humans that were raised in pagan communities, and they're different than we are because they never had the magic squished out of them, right? And imagine what a world of that could be like, right? We need to make these spaces welcoming. It's part of why community work is important, is figuring that out,
So with that, then, maybe this is more of a, I'm not sure how to ask this without coming across as mean. I'll be honest with you.
Oh, just do it. Let's just be shitty. Yeah, you can be as catty as you'd like.
So many of people of my age and your age, I mean, you're only a few years older than me. We came to paganism because of religious trauma. We came to paganism because we were outcasts, right? And the kids these days, they have such different needs. Like, they're coming to the pagan community and witchcraft, and particularly witchcraft among the young queer folk, for different reasons, right? Some of them are the same, some of them are different, but they're not dealing with the same kind of religious trauma.
That's
generally than we did.
Well, and even their trauma around gender and sexual expression is different. So my spouse and I are both in our 40s, and it's really different to be a queer person in your 40s than it is to be a queer person in your 20s.
Totally. It totally is. It totally is. And it's funny when, again, interacting with some of these younger people in the community, and you suddenly feel 110 because they're so different from you, right?
I love the battles that they just don't even fight. It's amazing. And I'm a little just this much jealous sometimes.
A little bit. I know. I feel the same way. But as a community builder, then, especially somebody who has been in the community for so long, you've built your foundations in a particular context 20 years ago and have built onto those. How do you, I don't want to say how do you keep yourself relevant, how do you keep up with those needs?
So it's really important to have a mentor who's much younger than you. So one of the lovely things about being a publicly available community is many people come in, and we have a long history at Frederick Cups of noticing who wants to help and empowering them and bringing them into the teams that lead and build rituals that communicate what we need. The organizational structure of Frederick Cups includes sort of two rings, and one is the dragons, and the dragons are the ones that do everything, right? We're the ones that are carrying water and shaping the rituals and writing the liturgies and doing all of the things. And that's a group of almost 40 people. Wow. And then there's the board, which is about 6. And that larger group has a yearly retreat or a bi-yearly, or what, how do you say that? It's twice a year. I just lost the word for that. So we meet twice a year as the whole group, which includes someone who's 16. So we make sure that we are including younger voices, and quite frankly, you need to have a mentor who's younger than you, or you're just going to get lost. So I'm very grateful for the fact that my social circle and my spiritual circle includes people who are much younger than I am. And it's part of how I stay caught up. And it isn't even so much staying relevant, it's just staying with it, trying to
Yes.
hang on to the dragon
That's what
as
I
it
was trying
goes
to say.
fast. Yeah, because things are changing and in beautiful ways. There are some glorious transformations in witchcraft coming down the pike. And if we're not paying attention, we'll miss them. So we need to be listening to younger voices and also honoring the older voices. So, there are members of the board who are in their 70s and up, and I value them because they've seen it. They were here when it landed, they went to the goddess festivals. One of them was at fucking Woodstock. Like, I want that wisdom too. We need to have an understanding that this is a living tradition, which means it changes. And that's one of the best things about it. We're all seeing what happens to traditions that get locked into a time. We need to be able to move and transform, and also have the wisdom to know what is baby and what is bathwater when we're culling. And that is sometimes a little tricky. Especially since, so many of the first generation were problematic in their way. So figuring
This
out what
is
to do
true.
about that is a whole fucking
This is
situation.
very true. I think that piece around traditions that get locked into time and then lost is really important. I've certainly identified this with quite a lot of the younger people coming in, wanting to connect in with folklore, wanting to connect in with Christianity, but make it their own, right? Bring in the Psalms, bring in working with the saints into their witchery, because it's what they grew up with, but it's also a cultural thing for them to feel empowered with. And one of the biggest pieces is they say Wicca, traditional Gardnerian Alexandrian Wicca, is old. It's no longer relevant for them. They don't feel connected with it anymore. And so that idea of kind of that almost like a healthy individualism versus an unhealthy individualism, right? I'm going to make this work for me, but also I have this dialogue then I can have with other people who are also doing the same thing.
Absolutely. And I think that there's a lot of going through some of the established traditions and taking a fresh look at things because it needs it, quite frankly. We are moving well past the binary. White supremacy is interesting because it's insidious. It's like a vapor that's in the air we breathe, and it's present in many of our older and more established traditions. And going through and beginning that hard work of dismantling these systems, it takes time. And quite frankly, there are a lot of people who don't want to look at something that they've loved and given their lives to and go, oh, we really do need to change that. But we must, if we want to stay able to connect and heal and grow ourselves. Also, if you aren't slightly uncomfortable, you're probably doing it wrong. Like, you should be finding your edges always.
Oh, I totally feel that. I totally feel that. That's the ironic thing, really, about witchcraft, isn't it? People see in it an empowerment, and they want that power for themselves, while also not really intending to do the deep work. And then suddenly they're doing the deep work, right?
Yes.
Funny, isn't it?
It really is. Give me just 1 second. Saga, stop. Why are you eating this? Here. I'm so sorry. I have dogs in the office. Here, you take this and go over there.
It's okay.
My apologies. I heard her chewing on a magazine.
Okay, that's why I'm in this shared space. My cat would be like all over the place right now.
No, but very much to your point, I think that there is a presence in witchcraft that loves the ceremonies and loves the stories and the songs and the pageantry, but is sometimes unwilling to do the deeper work, the self work that must go along with it if we want to be responsible religious practitioners. I've seen over the years many people come so close to something really good and then immediately turn and run away, or have like a revelation at a gathering or a festival and then not implement it in their lives in any meaningful way. And it's tough to watch people do it over and over again. Like, we are one of the few religions in the world with a system that is almost perfectly designed to help you unfuck yourself. Please do the work of that. Use all of the skills that we have, right? We literally have spells and practices and meditations and journeys that will help you unfuck yourself. It should be part of your magic.
You think it comes down to a belief? We were talking before about how, people who get jealous because they see other people becoming magical and they want that, but they don't believe in the magic.
I think there's that. And I think we also, at least here in the United States, have a culture that I would say actively discourages introspection. And most of the best witches I know, all of the best witches I know, all of us have done a fairly large stint through therapy. Some of us have been through some shit too. Like we have gone through shadow and come out the other side, and it's part of where our power comes from. And there is nothing that teaches like self-exploration and really getting an understanding of who you are. Along with that, I think some areas of magical skill, unless you know yourself quite well, are difficult to attain. Particularly when we're talking about interacting with spirits, we need to really know the sound and texture and taste of our own thoughts in order to be able to effectively interface with something that is not us, but is using the inside of our heads to communicate. We need to have a very good understanding of self and a good grounding in our own boundaries and in our own empowerment in order to do so safely. And all of that takes time and work and multimodality efforts, right? It's not just witchcraft, right? Most of us need to do some very, very practical, very psychologically based self-work.
Oh, completely. Oh, absolutely. And speaking as a therapist here, I completely agree. Far too often people spiritually bypass with these traditions. And I mean, there's a possibility for any spiritual tradition to be used in that way. But I feel that with witchcraft particularly, again, I guess it's
No, that's such a good point. That's the New Age influence.
Yeah.
And I know hashtag not all New Agers. I am aware.
Don't
And
come for her.
also,
Don't
exactly, like you can try, you won't win. But no, that's too arrogant. You might, it depends. But there was a very strong, I believe, deliberate attempt to make us seem safe. Right. We had the satanic panic that happened in the 70s and the 80s. And then we had the reaction to that where we're like, okay, we need to make everyone understand that we are not coming for their children.
Right.
And so there was a strong glitter and light layer put over witchcraft. And it was very practical. And honestly, it was needed at the time. This doesn't happen as much as often now, but even in the early aughts, I was involved as a clergy person, as a representative of paganism in court cases where someone was using pagan religion as an excuse to take another person's kids away from them. Like that was the world, and everyone needs to remember there's a reason it was this way. And also this emphasis on like good vibes only meant that we did a lot of spiritual bypassing of larger issues. And I think it's part of where abuses of power and some of the toxic personalities that rose to the top, that's where that problem came from, because we weren't willing to look at it and address it in any meaningful way, simply because we were still in damage control mode of trying to keep from getting fired if someone found out we were into witchcraft.
That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. I remember growing up up here in Canada, even that having stones thrown at me because of that. That was only the early 2000s. That idea, even with Buffy, even with Sabrina the Teenage Witch on, right? It makes a lot of sense, though, why so many people of our age now, 20 years ago, were gravitating towards those characters, the darker characters, the darker witches.
Yes.
Of course, we didn't have, American Horror Story Coven or, Sabrina the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina on television, right?
Well, and I think there's also a power there, right? Yes. So much of what I see coming into witchcraft are people who are seeking empowerment, sovereignty. There's a reason that word gets used a lot in our practices right now. Magic has always been the provenance of those who lack power, right? We turn to magic when all of the other systems don't work, when we need agency and we feel like we don't have it. And these darker occult figures have power. Along with that, for someone who is raised femme-bodied, is femme-presenting, there's witches, especially like wicked witches, are one of the few figures of power in our culture that don't get their power from a man of some sort. And that's, it's part of why every girl you know had a witch phase of some sort.
Right.
Like that's some of it really is about this feeling of agency and sovereignty, and we're seeking it collectively, and then some of us specifically for a whole lot of different reasons. So when we see these sort of darker portrayals of witchcraft, some of that is very delicious on a power level. And then on top of that, I think most of us know that our shadows contain our strength. Imagine if you could harness your anger and actually use it usefully. What could you do?
What could you do? Exactly, right.
Exactly.
It's
And this is the
fascinating
beauty
you
of witchcraft.
say all of that. It's fascinating because it's the same dynamic, but with different symbols in like the gay male population, for example. What I've noticed is that there tends to be a very so when I was putting my podcast out, right, this particular season, somebody on another guest's wall made the comment that she found it strange that the majority of these were all men. They all happen to be the queer men that we know who are bearded and all, witchy types, right? She said it was very odd that we're all bearded men, and there's only 5, female presenting people in the whole cast of 20 people, and I've noticed that the writers who happen to be writing in folkloric and traditional witchcraft tend to be all gay men, most of them, not all of it, most of them, right? And within that population, a lot of them are interested in like Sabbatic witchcraft, which is devil focused, folk devil focused, right? Same dynamic as what you were describing with that empowerment piece, but it's that the folk devil is inherently queer, so the power is coming from another gay sexual figure, right? Fascinating. That makes a lot of sense.
Well, and I think it's such a wonderful illustration that we need to resonate with power that feels familiar, and many of us are still finding a good space for us. I think those of us who occupy queer spaces are liminal by nature, so we need to find a liminal home. Witchcraft is a wonderful liminal home, and there are some amazing forms of it, but I can absolutely see where folkloric witchcraft as a liminal space, but is so deeply rooted with such glorious history, feels like home for someone who maybe has never had one before, because they are liminal, because they're not in a Western civilization recognized box, or at least not a box any of us would want to be in. I'm a femme-bodied person who is a former fucking Marine. There aren't boxes for girls like me.
Well, those boxes that did exist, they were very sexualized, like G.I. Jane, right? I remember that movie and thinking of that movie. I can't even watch that now.
I know it is. It's yeah, absolutely. It's the whole are you a pinup or a saint? And there are no places in between.
Ridiculous. It's ridiculous. That is an aspect of it we haven't actually gotten to. We alluded to it before, but we haven't gotten to it. So you were actually a former Marine. How was that?
It was a wonderful adventure. I was really lucky. I got out 2 weeks before September 11th, which meant I was one of the last people in the military within recent history who served during full peacetime. If you have the pleasure of doing that, it's wonderful. I lived in Japan for 3 years. I had an amazing adventure. I screwed up a leg pretty badly. I walked with a cane when I got out, and orthopedic surgery caught up with me about 4 years later, which is why I'm able to walk unassisted now. But I would not change a thing. For me, my journey in the Marines was, I learned so much about myself. It helped make me who I am. It's part of why I'm driven and focused and can work very hard. It gave me a lot of confidence. One of the things we talk about in Blackfeather is the usefulness of combat training in some form. We encourage people to seek out martial arts or some other form of movement practice. Our bodies and our spirits and our psyches exist in one space, and having, like going to leg day won't necessarily make your magic stronger, but it will make you feel more steady on your feet. And for me, knowing that I can handle myself in a fight, and that, that I can be a monster if needed, makes me a stronger practitioner. I believe in my ability to get out of trouble. And this is a very powerful piece of knowledge for a witch. It allows us to do more ambitious and more interesting magic if we trust our capacity to handle things maybe going a little bit sideways.
Right, that makes sense. That makes sense. I guess my kind of last question with that then, I've always assumed, maybe it's just the Canadian military, but I've always assumed that part of the process of joining such a large military apparatus was that really suppression of self. When you came out, I mean, first of all, that's an assumption. I don't know if that's true
Nope,
or
you're
not.
right.
Yeah.
We are, at least when I went in, these many years ago, right? We're talking about the Marine Corps boot camp 20 years ago. You're not allowed to use the words I, me, or mine. You are this recruit. Your identity is fully removed so that they can then make you into a Marine. The way I always try to describe it to people is they sort of take you apart and then put you back together again in a different order.
How did that fit into then your witchcraft journey right afterwards?
So I was already pagan when I got in. I was one of the very first service members to go through with Wicca on my dog tags. That was new.
That's huge.
Later,
wow.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I later knew one of the majors in the Air Force who had helped make that happen. We met after my time in service, but it meant that I was one of the first out pagans that a lot of people ever met. So my response when I got to Okinawa, to my permanent duty station, was to look at their religious sort of offerings. There was a little leaflet called Okinawa This Week, which had all of the different churches and things, and find an alternative religious discussion circle, and then find pagans. I began my first pagan group when I was in Okinawa. It was called Pagan Voices. It ran for many, many years. And so I led rituals on the beach. It was pretty fun. A lot of Navy guys would come in, or sailors rather, would come in during when they would come into port, and they'd like stop at the PX. And so on a night of a ritual, my friends and I would go out and play Spot the Pentacles, and we'd find folks and be like, hey, do you want to go to a ritual? And it's the military, right? So like, fucking yeah, let's go.
Yeah.
So we'd pile a bunch of people into a van, go out to a beach, do a full moon ritual, and then take them back and drop them off. And that was the world then. So I was very much out while I was still enlisted. Was I as alternative as I am now? Was I as progressive as I am now? No. I had a lot of internalized toxic masculinity to get over. I think that one of the best things the Marines did for me was take the chip off my shoulder, which then positioned me into a place where I could get better. But also my journey in therapy started basically in the Marines. I got into enough fist fights that my choice was go to anger management counseling or go to the brig. So some of my own journey towards self-understanding began then. And I think ultimately it very much influences my witchcraft. So, it's that usual thing, right? It's lived paganism. Everything about who you are becomes part of your magic.
This is the thing. It's something I've heard from quite a few veterans who are pagan, is that paganism allowed them to really go inwards again and find that balance in themselves. It sounds similar to what you're saying now.
Very much so. I think paganism also gives us an ability to have an identity beyond the military. There's a trope that everyone has seen, right? So it's the dude with the giant truck, and it's covered with the service stickers for whatever branch that dude was in, and his jacket has the service symbol on the back, and his baseball cap has the service symbol on it, and like it's become his entire identity. And I have big concerns when I see folks like that. I honestly don't often reference being a former Marine when I'm in my regular in-person environment, simply because the folks that are so blazoned with it usually haven't established a personality outside of that culture. And paganism is glorious because it allows us to be more, right? So we are service members who made the choice to serve this country and to sacrifice years of our lives and sometimes parts of our bodies. And also we serve the gods, we're connected to the earth, we're connected to another community. It allows us to be more.
I think that's a beautiful place to end. This has been a wonderful chat. The parts we were able to record.
Thank you so much for having me on, Ben. It's been so nice to get a chance to talk to you.
Like I said, I was really looking forward to having you on and to connecting with you. Part of this whole podcast for me has been connecting with people I wouldn't have necessarily been able to beforehand, and again coming back to that sense of community. I really appreciate your time. And so, with that being said, is there anything that you would like to plug to invite any of the listeners here to your community? Anything you're working on?
Sure. So I have Black Feather Mystery is a 4-year school, and we have Magpie trainings starting up, one in person in Frederick, Maryland that starts later this month. There is an online version that occurs starting in November. If you go to blackfeathermystery.com, and there's a direct link from Glasse Witch Cottage, that is a great way to get involved. I teach regularly. I blog. I've been in a grief space, so my blogs have been sporadic lately, but will, as I heal, will come back online. Feel free to hook up with the Glass Witch Cottage community. I offer monthly Zoom workshops. There are a ton of ways that if my take on witchcraft seems appealing to you, come say hello. I don't think there are any other Irene Glasses in the country right now. I'm easy to find. Come say hi. I live, eat, breathe, sleep this stuff. I am more than happy to journey down your witchcraft path with you.
And that is Irene Glasse, not Eileen Glasse.
Yes,
so
with an R. Yes.
That's wonderful. I will put all those links down below.
Thank you.
I've been Ben Stimson. This has been Irene Glasse. And thank you for listening and thank you for watching. Have a great night, folks.